Hello, everybody. Chef Marcus Guiliano here, and welcome to Chef on a Mission Radio, episode number 74. We're going to jump into beverages, into wine specifically today. We're going to talk about organic wine, nitrate-free wine, not nitrate-free wine, sulfite-free wine. Cured meats have nitrates. Wines have sulfites. So I'll talk about sulfites. I'll talk about tannins. I'll talk about what you need to know to drink better quality or healthier wines today in this episode. So stay tuned. But first, this is brought to you by Aromatime Bistro, 165 Canal Street in Ellenville, New York. That's been my restaurant since 2003, the first certified green restaurant in upstate New York. We were certified back in 2008 or so, 7, 8, 9, one of those years in the very beginning. And we got certified because I wanted to back up our claims. A lot of restaurants claim that they're green, that they're serving organic foods, that they're serving organic wine. And I wanted a way to actually say to the consumer, well, go online and check and see what I do, because it's third-party verified and I'm audited very closely to make sure that I'm buying what I say I'm buying or not buying what I'm not supposed to be buying. Because the Green Restaurant Association can call any distributor at any time and pull a month's worth of invoices. And if they see something that's doesn't meet the what the green certification is, then I lose points in that category, and the more points I lose, the less I'm certified. So we are happy to be doing well over 50 steps with the Green Restaurant Association up here in Ellenville, New York. So stop by and see us. Aromatime, THYME Bistro. It's Aroma, AROMA, time like the herb, bistro.com. Follow us, come eat with us, come say hello. And second, VIP Winery Vacations. VIP Winery Vacations we've been doing since 2015, where we bring you to our friends' vineyards in Italy and Spain, in New York State, and now Valle de Guadalupe in Mexico. So VIP wineryvacations.com. Lifetime memories are not optional. So travel with Jamie and I to some amazing wineries in these regions, and you'll get the VIP red carpet treatment. All right. So speaking about wine and wine tours and wine, so let's jump right into this whole thing about organic wine. So the thing about organic wine is so misleading, and I see even some of these so-called wine experts that don't even understand this. And I would say the majority of wine sales professionals, these are the people that are selling the wine, are misrepresenting the term organic when it comes to wine. Yes, even the people that are selling the wine, the salespeople that walk into me that have been doing this their whole lives, that are saying, check out this bottle of organic wine. I look at them like, this wine's not organic. And there's some big confusion, which I'm going to talk about that in this episode right here. So where should we start first? Should we start with sulfites or organic wine? Let's start with the organic, since this is the goods of the show here. So there's a big difference between grapes that are grown organically in the vineyard. So you have a vineyard and a winery. It's broken down into two parts. The vineyard is the person who grows all the grapes. The winery is the person who crushes the grapes, ferments them, bottles them. Now, sometimes that's the same company, the same family, the same winery. The winery is the vineyard. They're both. Sometimes they grow some of their own grapes, and sometimes they buy grapes. So a winery can have its own vineyard, and a winery can have a relationship with farmers and go out and buy grapes from another vineyard, grapes that they don't own the land. In fact, some wineries have 0 vineyards, and they buy 100% of the grapes that are grown for their wine. So they don't own any land, or the land they own does not have vines on it. And all of these are very popular models when it comes to actual wine. to winemaking. So it's not like oh my gosh, what do you mean that person doesn't have any land and those are frauds, imposters? No, there's a winery and a vineyard. There's two separate things. And when you get into the spirits world, the same thing. A lot of these spirits that you're buying, these high-end whiskeys, bourbons, ryes, they're not a distillery. They're just a bottler. They're buying the stuff already made from MGP, Midwestern Grain Products, or outfit like that, and they're buying the barrels, bringing them in. And Tito's does this, folks. Tito's doesn't make their own product. They buy it from somebody who's already making the neutral grain spirit, and they run it through their stills one more time and call it like handmade and stuff like that. There's a lot of controversy with Tito's. A lot of controversy. There's been lawsuits because of misrepresentation on that. But again, it's not that it's wrong. It's just part of the business. And as long as you know that as a consumer, then fine. You can make a choice to support somebody who's distilling and making the product, or someone who's just buying it from a massive corporation, bringing the barrels in and slapping their label on it, which is a lot, by the way, folks, more than you think, especially when it comes to ryes in the United States. A lot of people are doing that. So back to the wine. So it's totally legit for this business model for both. So don't think like, oh my gosh, that winery is a scam and they're not growing their own grapes. No, the winery just makes the wine. The vineyard grows the grapes. And like I said, probably the majority of the vineyards that I know are in this relationship, especially here in New York, where they're half and half, where they're growing some of their grapes and they're buying some of their grapes. And it's a way for a winery to grow its business and grow its sales, right? So you start out with 30 acres of land. You're growing on 20 acres of it. You have the winery and the other 10 in the parking lot and all that kind of stuff. So you're starting with only a certain amount of land. You grow your grapes, you make your wine, and all of a sudden, 5-6 years down the road, you're like, wow, we're actually selling everything we make and grow here. We're actually selling it all. We need to increase our sales. So how do we do that? Well, now we create another label of wine, another line of wine, another whatever tier of wine, and we're going to start bringing grapes in, and we're going to blend them with our own, or we're going to actually make something new and distinctive and separate the two. And you have your state bottled wines, your non-estate bottled wines. So this is how businesses scale and grow, right? So it's not that it's wrong. It's just that this is totally accepted, by the way, totally accepted. So now back to agriculture. The people in the vineyard where the vines are growing may be growing the grapes 100% organic. Here's the most common thing I hear. They're growing organic. They're just not certified because they reserve the right to spray chemicals. Well, gee, well, you're organic, you're not organic. You're organic some years, you're not. So what it's a little confusing. And that's one of the things that a lot of wine reps will throw out. Oh, they're organic. They're just not certified. But when we mean organic, we mean the vines in the vineyard. Because there's two ways that a wine is certified organic. A wine is certified organic from the grapes, how they're grown, number one. And then in the winery, how the wine is made. Do you know wines in Europe, the United States? In the United States, you're allowed more, but you're allowed like 55, 59 additives in wine. And this is after the fact the grapes have been grown organically, right? So you grow the grapes organically, and then it comes into the winery. And in Europe, you're allowed like 50 something. In America, you're allowed like 70 something. But you can add these additives to the wine, colorings, flavorings, of course, sulfites. That's an adding, right? So you add all these to it, and all of a sudden you're like, well, yeah, the winemaking process is so far from organic, even though the grapes were grown very organically. So see how this is playing out here, folks? Two separate operations, two separate procedures, it's really two separate certifications when it comes down to making organic wine. So now the vineyard is doing their part. Let's say the vineyard's 100% organic, 100% organic. So the vineyard is growing the grapes, and now it comes into the winery, but the winery is not into natural wines. So natural wines are where you're going to find your organic style wines, or your organic wines, the natural style wines, where they're not fining as much, they're not filtering. So some people don't. A lot of people don't like the natural wines. They don't like how they're made. The flavors, folks, a really true organic wine with no additives and very minimal. What do I want to say? Very minimal fooling around with it. Some of these wines are not what you're used to drinking at all. So when you get a bottle of wine and you're looking for organic, the wine must have the USDA certified organic label on the wine for the wine itself. Now, there's different regulations in the US versus Europe, and I'll talk about that as well. So the winery is growing all the grapes perfectly. They get it into the vineyard. The vineyard grows all great. They get into the winery. The winery now has to respect the same procedures and make the wine organically based upon the lack of all these additives and sulfites and stuff, which is extremely, 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 extremely rare. I would have to say 95+%, 98%, 99% of the wines that are labeled, that where a rep walks in, a sales rep, or you walk into a store and a restaurant, there, oh, this wine is organic. No, the wine's not organic. The grapes are organic. This is the difference. Made with organic grapes, or the whole wine is organic, which means the grapes are organic anyway. That second tier where everything's organic is extremely, extremely, extremely rare. So a lot of people are misled in thinking, oh, it's an organic wine. There's no sulfites, there's no chems, there's no additives. I'm drinking a great pure wine. You're drinking a better wine than grapes that were sprayed with chemicals and weren't doing sustainable practices and weren't giving back to mother nature and giving back to the environment and the earth. But you're not drinking a true organic wine. And this is a part that I think is very misleading, because I think a sales rep should walk in, or you could go into a store or because there's organic sections in stores where the wines are not organic. The grapes are, but the wines aren't. So I think you should be able to walk into a store and have everybody who's a wine professional explain to you, I have wines that are made with organic grapes, but the process of making the wine isn't organic. And then I have wines that are made with organic grapes and the whole process is organic and the whole wine is certified organic from start to finish. And this would allow people to make better choices. But instead, people come in to my restaurant and they say, well, the other restaurant that I went last night had organic wine. Well, they did not have organic wine. They had wines made with organic grapes. And when you explain things to people, they get upset with you because they're like, well, I just don't understand why you can't have like an organic. I'm like, we have wines made from organic grapes. We don't have, and well, this other restaurant has in this restaurant. When I go to the store, I always buy organic wine. And when they tell me what they're drinking, I'm like, that's not organic wine. This is in the process. And people are very, very, very confused by this. And so the industry, I believe, the sales reps, the companies that are pushing the wine, selling the wines, really need to teach their sales force to make this massive distinction. Now, sulfites. Are sulfites allowed in organic wine? Well, now let's break this down, because all grapes have sulfites, naturally occurring sulfites. Strawberries have sulfites. Dover sole has food. Everything has sulfites, right? Everything has a certain level of sulfites, which is why a lot of people are not really allergic to sulfites, which we'll talk about that soon. So in the United States, if you make wine where the wine is certified organic, you are not allowed to add sulfites. You're allowed to have the natural occurring sulfites that are naturally in the grapes. Some wineries like Frey Vineyards will go a step further and bottle after all the natural sulfites have faded to an undetectable level. Because the longer wine ages, the less sulfites it will have. So if you have a sulfite allergy, a known sulfite allergy, each grape is different, right? So Pinot Noir is far different than Merlot and Cabernet, and very different than white wines. White wines have a lot more sulfites, and I don't know if people know that, but they have a lot more sulfites. This is one of another misconceptions of wine that I'm going to explain here in a moment. So the United States, you're not allowed, if the USDA logo is on there, you're not allowed to add any added sulfites. Naturally occurrings are fine. Different sulfite, it's natural, it's in the fruit already. Other sulfites a lot of sulfites are not naturally mined or made. They're actually synthetic sulfites that they're adding to wine. So that's another whole difference with sulfites. So in Europe, if you make an organic wine in Europe, the whole process, and you're shipping it to the US, by law, they are allowing 100 parts per million for red wine to have sulfites and 110 parts per million of white wine to have sulfites added to them. So you're allowed. So if you pick up a bottle of Italian wine that says certified organic wine on it, or Spanish wine, certified organic wine, they're allowed to add sulfites. That's just the rule. They're allowed to. Should that be the case? I don't think it should be, but that's just one of the loopholes in the certifications. It's like chickens. Even certified organic chickens that are air chilled are still sprayed with chlorine. It's part of the process. It's how the big boys play the game. It's how Bell and Evans plays the game in the organic world. Else you couldn't produce an organic chicken commercially if you didn't spray or soak in chlorine to kill any possible contamination, cross-contamination of E. coli. It's just how it is. Should that be the way it is? No. Is that what your local farmer does? Not at all. Your local farmer, they're not spraying with chlorine and stuff like that because it's only their chickens are processing. So, but let's get off the chicken topic and back to wine. So when you walk into a store now, and if you do not want any added sulfites and you want something that's truly organic from start to finish, you will have to buy an American produced wine. Simple as that. Are there many on the market? There's not, because literally 99% of this whole organic thing, when they say I have organic wine, the wine's not organic, the grapes are. So now let's talk about, do you really have a sulfite allergy? Because a lot of people say, well, I can't have sulfites. Sulfites are, so I just really can't have sulfites. So now here's the great test, because as I mentioned, in the white world, white wines have more sulfites than red wines. And that's because sulfites are preservative. White wines need more help to be preserved than reds. Because what really preserves red wines in the wine is the tannins, those bitter notes, the tannins that dry your mouth out when you drink the wine, that hopefully is balanced by some fruit, so it's not all dry on your mouth. So tannins actually make the wine last longer. And as you age the wine, the tannins diminish, the sulfites diminish as you age wine longer. So if you're picking up a bottle of 1980s right now, Bordeaux, that's been sitting there for 30 plus years, that's totally different than the wine they just produced, the same red wine from the same grapes from the same plot of land that they just produced last year. The sulfites and tannin levels are drastically different. So you might say, well, gee, you know what? I drank this wine and I had no problems. Now I'm drinking their wine again and I have massive problems. I have a headache or whatever your side effects are from either a sulfite or a tannin. This doesn't make sense. Well, because it's a different age, and 2, 3, 4, 5 years on a bottle of wine will make a difference with tannins and sulfites. So if you have an insensitivity, try to get wine that's aged. Try to get wine or grapes that have less, like Pinot Noir has less tannins than perhaps Cabernet or Malbec or other ones. So the varietal might be key as well to you having success with drinking that wine. And I think some people have it figured out. Some people walk in and they say, I can only drink Pinot Noir. I can only do this. Now, if you think you have a sulfite allergy and you think the sulfites, because here's the most common thing I hear people that think they have sulfite allergies. Sulfites bother me. I can only drink white wines. And that's the first inclination that it's not a sulfite allergy, it's a tannin reaction, because again, white wines have more sulfites. So if this is you and you have issues with red wines and not white wines, you're going to be looking at the actual tannins and not the sulfites. Now that's a big difference. One way to test yourself on sulfites is to go buy those apricots that are really bright orange in the store, because they are treated with a ton of sulfites. Those have a lot. Those have like 2,000 parts per million of sulfites versus wine that has 110 parts. So there's a massive 20 times the amount of sulfites in those apricots. So go buy some of those gold apricots, eat a couple. If you do not have any reactions, then you're looking at tannins now, because that's your sulfite. That is your sulfite guide. Those really dried fruits that are really bright, and all those fruits have it. Cranberries, craisins, all those have it. By the way, did you know that dried cranberries, craisins, the majority of companies, 99%, I'm not sure that's quite accurate, but the majority of the companies actually get their craisins as a byproduct. The cranberries are already juiced for cranberry juice, and then so now they have to make these into craisins. So they have to like plump them up with some glucose and dry them and make these craisins that are actually a byproduct. The juice is already removed out of it, and it's going for ocean spray juice, and I have all this stuff left. And like, what do we do with all this? Let's plump it with some sugar and dry them up and call it a craisin. There are companies out there that do make dried cranberries from the whole unpressed fruit, and it will say it on the label there, but again, extremely, extremely, extremely rare. Now back to the sulfites and tannins. So the apricots are your sulfite guide. That is what will tell you, point you in that direction. So now sulfites. Now, if it's the sulfites, or certified organic wines from the United States are how you're going to avoid sulfites. Frey Vineyards is probably one of the best because they actually label it sulfite free, no added sulfites, no naturally occurring sulfites. They have all this broken down on all their wines. Great, great family run winery in California. But there are other wineries out there too as well. Now, I'm not saying don't support wines that are made with organic grapes if the wine's not organic, because we always want to support anybody, a farm, anybody who's doing the right thing with the earth, with the ground. That is, that's our first and foremost, right? We want to protect our natural resources. So, and again, if you go to any old restaurant, you're not going to find wine that's all of a sudden the whole deal's organic. And the sommelier, the owner, whoever's going to come to you and be like, oh, this is wines are organic here. And it's not. Basically, it's not, unless it says USDA certified organic on the label there. All right. So there are going to be other labels like Demeter, because a lot of wines are grown grapes are grown biodynamically, which is a fantastic way to grow grapes, an amazing way to grow grapes. But again, then the grapes go into the vineyard, into the winery, and then they, from there, are made with additives. Now, the French, because they're allowed less additives, or the Europeans, they're allowed like 20 less additives than Americans for their wine. They're going to be a little more careful with their wines and what they add to them. And so European wines can be a bit cleaner. They can be a bit cleaner. Not that it's always a guarantee, but they can be a bit cleaner because they just have more traditions and less things that are approved for their wines for additives. So I hope that helps you with your quest for drinking organic wines, enjoying wines, and not having to worry about sulfites or tannins and things like that. I really hope that helps you with that journey. And if you want to join us on that journey, drinking wine, of course, check out VIP Winery Vacations. VIP Winery Vacations, we take you to our friends' wineries in Europe, in Italy, in Mexico, all throughout New York. That is one of the themes here of my restaurant at Aroma Time. Is we like to say there's a story in every pour. We actually visit the majority of the vineyards that are on our wine list. So when you go up and down the wine list, we pick a bottle out for you. We typically have lots of great memories and stories from those vineyards all over Europe, Spain and Italy and California. We've been all over California, and it's really a lot of fun to meet family-run wineries and meet the families and meet the winemakers and have dinner with them and break bread with them and have them show you their property. It's really one of the most amazing things. Wine is truly one of those cultural things that has many levels of appreciation. When you meet the actual people who pour their lives into it, their hearts, their soul, their love, their passion, and make a truly amazing product from the land, it's really, really amazing. And the patience of winemakers. Wine is one of those businesses where you just don't open a winery and start producing wine the very next day and start making revenue. A restaurant, you can sign a lease, put everything in place, and 3 months later, in our case at Aroma Time, it was that month later, 30 days, we were up and running and creating revenue. Some wineries take 5, 6, 7 years, 10 years, which is why I was explaining in the beginning, some wineries will buy their grapes. Because if you start a winery in a vineyard, you have to plant the grapes. The grapes have to grow. They have to go through several harvest seasons before the grapes are good enough to start making wine out of. That's going to be 3, 4, 5 years. And then you get the wine, you make it, you crush it, you ferment it, you age it for another year before you release it. And you're already at 6 years before you've ever brought a single dollar in to the operation. So some wineries, and this is why distilleries do this as well, some wineries will automatically buy the grapes in the beginning, then plant their own grapes and then start weaning off or balancing their grapes with the other grapes. So if they buy grapes from day one and they make a rosé wine, they can literally have wine 6 months later, a year later. They're having wine in the bottles and they are up and running with production and up and running with revenue. In the spirit world, when you're making a whiskey, we all like when we drink whiskeys, bourbons, ryes. Oh, how old is that? Oh, how old is that bourbon? How long is it aged for? And, you'll say, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 2.5 years. Well, imagine starting a distillery, all that expensive equipment, the building, all this, and then all of a sudden saying, what do you mean we have to wait 4 years before we can release our whiskey to start making revenue? This is why some places like to do vodka, because vodka is not a non-aging spirit, right? Vodka, gin just have to infuse with the botanicals. So vodka versus bourbon or rye or an American rye whiskey is going to be years of difference in revenue. And this is why a distillery that has brown spirits, whiskeys, bourbons, ryes, will go out and buy already made barrels from MGP, Midwestern Grain Products. They will already buy the stuff already made in the barrels and aging. And they will bring the barrels into their operation. And from there, they will put them into bottles. So literally, you've cut that process down from 3 to 4 years to 5 years to 3 to 4 months. And you have bottles of whiskey that you can put your own label on. And the way that you know this, if a distillery is doing this, is you look on the back label and I'll say bottled by such and such distillery, or it'll say distilled and bottled by such and such distillery. That's the distincting factor that's there. And I love it when people say to me, you've got to try this rye, Marcus. This rye is amazing. It's amazing. This new rye, it's amazing. I'm like, okay. And I'm like, are they making their own product? And everybody's like, oh yeah, they're making their own product. They make their own product. Flip over the label, look at it. Bottled by XYD's distillery. I'm like, okay, they didn't make this product. They just bottled the product. They already bought. This is like you buying Poland Springs water in massive barrels and big jugs, tanker load of Poland Springs water. And you can do something to it, like maybe throw some crystals in it, right? And say, oh, we're transforming the water, and then put it into your own bottles and your own label. And you don't know even what a well looks like. You don't even know you don't even know anything about the water business, and you don't have the land, you don't have the well, you don't have the rights. You're just buying water and just rebottling it into, and many people do this with tap water, right? They'll filter tap water from municipal water and they'll put it into a bottle. And it's great as long as you as the consumer know what you're buying. Then I have no problem with any of these. Same thing with the winery and the vineyard, the grapes. Are they growing them or not growing them? I have no problem. Just let us know. Is the wine organic or is it not organic? Let us know. And I think there should be regulations on wine. If you're going to say made with organic wine, made with organic grapes, I think there needs to be more of a definition on there by law so people aren't confused and thinking that the whole wine is organic and they're not getting sulfites, they're not getting additives. Because it's frustrating if you have sensitivities and allergies to certain things. And spirits, the beverage world in general, you don't need to put anything on the labels. I mean, you can take beer and put fish bladders in them as a finding agent, isinglass, and the brewery, the label does not have to reflect what's in there. A lot of times they filter with charred cow bones, bovine bones, and that's the way they filter. And it'd just be nice to know if they're putting animal products or using animal products to being put into your spirits. Winemakers fine wines with powdered egg whites. Some use bentonite clay, but it'd be nice to say, hey, we use egg whites. Other ingredients in here, egg whites. The only thing they're allowed to, that they have to put on there by law, is sulfite. So it says contains grapes and sulfites. Doesn't say anything else. Doesn't say colorings. Does not say anything else. So I feel the beverage industry, and I'm not sure why this is, but the beverage industry needs to really have an overhaul of labeling legislation so we can understand what we're truly, honestly drinking or not drinking, so we can know what to avoid and have full transparency here, which is why Jamie and I, one of the reasons Jamie and I love going to visit the vineyards, because when you're there firsthand, you see what they're doing. We're at one operation a year or so ago, and I'm like, what are all those bags of sugar doing here? Like, well, we have to balance out the acidity in the wine. You have to balance it out. If it's too sweet, if it's too dry, and we're looking for a little sweeter wine, we add some sugar to it. I was like, oh, that's nice to know, because that's not on the label. But when you have a pallet of Domino's sugar sitting right there, that could be genetically modified beet sugar going into a bottle of high-end wine, there's a major connection gap, communication gap to the end consumer of what they're honestly drinking. All right, folks, thanks for tuning in. I appreciate it. Check out aromatimebistro.com. Follow us on Instagram or wherever, and we're everywhere. And VIP Winery Vacations, and happy drinks.